get the recording. And I, as you guys know, I sent up a follow-up email with the recording and then the deck that Kasara is going to use. So you'll get that after the event. And then please feel free to ask questions. I've got to tell you, I usually find guest executives for these thought leadership forums, but I reached out to a few people and I had several people say to me, gosh, Cindy, this is kind of an early thinking in terms of vendors and the kind of data and how you manage that data and all that. And so I said, that's fine. So I would just ask you guys, because Sarah's going to ask some questions. And if you have anything to add, come off mute, add it. Or if you've got questions of your own, please, please, please ask them and I'll be monitoring the chat. So I think a lot of the people that are on here know about ESA. We've partnered with ADP for the last 8 years and built this executive network that includes both CHROs and CIOs. And by the way, when people retire, we don't kick them out because we really want to have everybody included in what we're doing. We've got 3 things that we offer. As you guys know, we've got the thought leaderships forums that we do monthly. And then we've got the ESA Work Tech. We had a really good one last week, every quarter. And then we also, as many of you know, because you're in the program, we have a board positioning membership that if you are not a member, check it out on our website. So today I'm really, really excited about this one because Sarah and I have been working on this for a month or so just to make sure that we've got great content for you guys. Because Sarah is the designer of sales technology and AI solutions for ADP. And she actually is the one at ADP that kind of decides what kind of vendors to bring in because I know a lot of you guys have probably seen the commercial with Matthew McConaughey, and he's walking down the street, Salesforce in a cowboy hat, and he's saying data is the new gold. This is what this is about. When you're picking your vendors, and she's going to go into a lot of examples and detail. When you're picking your vendor, no matter what it is, your CIOs, CTOs should be looking at what kind of data you're getting with those vendors. She previously to her role today, she was a future of work consultant, and she was advising the C-suite on macro trends impacting organizations. And she speaks globally about AI and data literacy. This year, she actually is now a official adjunct professor at Moravian. I hope I got that right, Sarah. I'm sorry. And she is designing a professional studies course or has designed around innovation. And by the way, several people have reached out to me already to have her speak to their management teams after we sent out the invite. So feel free to do that. The follow-up email will have her email so you can actually do that. But with that, Kasara, I'm going to turn it over to you. Fill in the blanks about your background for everyone. Make sure they know how amazing you are. And then I'll be monitoring the chat. Did I record, guys? Yeah, I think I did.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right. Okay, well, it's all yours, Kasara.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And can you just confirm you can see my screen?
Yep.
We can.
Beautiful. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you. Thank you so much for attending and for obviously, I mean, the interest and excitement that I have around this topic is immense. And I'm going to dive into my background and all of the reasons why I'm so jazzed about it. But I do hope that by the end of this session, you are at least half as jazzed as I am. So this is just, again, Cindy already covered a lot of this, but additionally, so I started my graduate career with an MBA in predictive and prescriptive analytics. And once I dove into the quantitative, I realized how deeply I also wanted to understand the qualitative. And so I'm a PhD student studying human-centered artificial intelligence. So I'm in an anthropology program with a dissertation focused on humans and artificial intelligence. And so I could go on for days about that. I'm not going to take too much time, but I'm a mama, I'm a professor. I am, creating the courses that I teach, and very much so enjoy speaking and writing on these topics as well. And so by the end of today, I hope that each of you walk away with a a deeper understanding of how artificial intelligence is reshaping business leadership and the way that all of us show up within our work, some actionable strategies for really assessing your organizational readiness for these emerging technologies, and the current state of your organization and your approach to these technologies. Of course, as an anthropologist, I want to ensure that you walk away with a really good, strong grasp of the ethical and cultural dimensions that are involved in this AI adoption. And then potentially some insights from your peers. I am going to ask some questions. And so if you are able to answer, please do. And even more so, if you have questions for me, as Cindy said, come off of mute. Let's have a conversation. I want to make sure that the content is speaking directly to the challenges that you are currently facing as business leaders. And so really quick, I did just want to kind of lay a groundwork. As Cindy said, it was difficult to find executives that were very confident in the current strategy that they have regarding AI and Gen AI adoption. And so I've done some research again as someone that's studying not just culture, but organizational culture and the implications on artificial intelligence and from artificial intelligence. I've recognized that the average time for a new technology to reach widespread adoption over the last century was 15 years. And so by the midpoint of this century, it's expected to be 2 to 3. And that is an exceptional increase in percentage from, taking that long of, over a decade to adopt a new technology to now less or around 2 years. It's incredible. And a part of this, when it comes to artificial intelligence, AI winters, they were called, they've existed at many points in history. And so the first time that artificial intelligence as a term was heard was in 1956 at a Dartmouth conference. And there was, really vast and heavy interest from that point until about 1974. And, for about a decade, funding and interest really declined due to a lack of progress in meeting the ambitious expectations that were set early on. Then there was a breakthrough. AI came back to the forefront. And then there was a second winter in the late 1980s through most of the 90s that was again triggered by the collapse of a market for specialized artificial intelligence. It was due to very big advancements in the field, really high expectations, and then a decline in, obviously disseminating those expectations into ROI for organizations. And so now there wasn't really a true winter leading up to the generative AI boom, but there was about a 10 to 15 year period of very incremental advancements in the field that didn't garner any public attention. And so at every single phase of artificial intelligence's journey, there was peaks and valleys of very high hype, very high expectations, followed by valleys when those expectations weren't met quick enough. And so the interest deflated. And so the goal for me is to not let history repeat itself again after this generative AI boom. So obviously we're seeing another peak. We're seeing another really high hype cycle around this technology. And so globally, AI adoption has nearly doubled in the past 5 years. So again, generative AI was released to the public in the end of 2022, but even before then, we were seeing many organizations take a deep interest in machine learning and artificial intelligence within their organizations. So currently, early adopting organizations that are high performing attribute more than 20% of their EBIT to AI, with some of them reporting that AI contributes meaningful revenue increases of over 10% within certain functions, such as marketing and supply chain management. So this can really, there's still time to study the ROI of these investments, but this is incredible. This is high adoption, really early results that are showing an expected around 2 years of these widespread technologies being adopted at a very fast rate moving forward. And so it's critical for your organization to understand the level in which you are willing to take the risk with these emerging technologies. And
Kasara,
Cindy,
there is a question from Rick.
Sure.
It's real relevant to the last slide.
Sure.
Does the time to adopt a new technology depend upon the type of technology or the desire of adopters to use it?
Both, and that's such a good question. Actually, did Cindy plant you with that question? Because we are gonna cover that. Okay. All right, Cindy, you don't have to lie to me. No, I'm kidding. So, yeah, that's a phenomenal question, and the answer is it's both, but more so, if you look at the infrastructure that we had in the 20th century versus now, there's, a lot of this is due to the fact that we are experiencing exponential innovation and growth in this space, and so it's very much so going to help in the significant advancement of widespread adoption. But the type of technology, so generative AI is the now, right? Emerging technologies, this isn't going to be, you're not going to reach a finish line of generative AI adoption and be like, all right, we did it. No, there's going to be another technology. So it is both. Yeah, and we'll cover more of that in a little bit. Awesome. So again, when we think about the risk here, I've kind of placed all organizations into one of three buckets. And the great news is that you can move buckets. You are not forever beholden to your bucket, but this is a good point to maybe understand where your organization falls. So the very first are our risk averse observers. So they're super cautious to AI and generative AI. They maybe have taken very minimal or even zero investment into these projects, and they don't currently have a dedicated AI or Gen AI strategy or teams aligned to these strategies. And in my experience, many of the organizations that I talk to fall in this bucket, but the truth is they don't want to be here. They know that they need to take a risk. They know that they are facing the other risk of being left behind in this next technological revolution. And so this is a point where these risk averse observers have a huge opportunity to take even incremental steps in Gen AI adoption through vendors to really understand the impact and influence that these technologies can have on your org. Another bucket, and this one is my favorite to really to joke about because there were many minimal risk adopters that showed up early on and they were like, great news. We stood up a closed instance of ChatGPT through OpenAI and we did it. We did the innovating, we did the technology. And the truth is they did a thing, but they didn't do a very well approached thing, right? That wasn't strategic at all. They don't understand the broader benefits. They don't understand all of the potential applications. They haven't even considered the other steps in their AI journey. They did one incremental thing, and then they basically washed their hands of what else generative AI can do. And that's a mistake. And so I highly encourage all organizations to be calculated risk takers. And so I'm not saying that every org needs to jump full body into this technology and focus all of their energy and resources on adopting generative AI, but there is a way to very intentionally identify and prioritize specific AI and Gen AI use cases across your organization and to see artificial intelligence and generative artificial intelligence as a thread or a horizontal across every pillar of your business strategy. This is how it should be viewed. It should not simply be a pillar over here where we're thinking about emerging technologies. No, it needs to be a horizontal across all of it because the implications are vast and immense, and every single pillar of your org could see benefits from this emerging tech. And
Hey,
so being, yeah,
Sarah, I've got a question on that. I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you, but the
please.
question that I have in my mind is, okay, what you just said, then who should take the lead on making sure that happens across the entire organization?
Yeah, and I think this is oh, sorry, what? Oh, okay. So yeah, it's a phenomenal question. I think this is a beautiful time for, and I wrote an article about this actually almost a year ago now for Chief Data Officer magazine. But essentially, this is a point where the CHROs of an organization can and should be organizational architects right? This is a time to reimagine your workforce and to really be the leaders of this strategy because the implications are so vast. So, in tandem, if CHROs are partnering with CTOs or CIOs or CISOs, right? If there's true partnership there from a business strategy perspective, then that is where the true alignment will come. But in my wildest dreams, this is led by CHROs simply because the implications to our workforce are so vast. And there needs to be a really intentional approach there. Awesome. Any other questions on these buckets before we dive into some readiness indicators?
I have a question.
Sure.
You mentioned your opinion on CHRO would be an ideal leadership role to lead this effort. Are there any CIOs or CTOs on this call that may feel differently? Just interested in hearing the counter argument to that. Alrighty. Thank you.
So we're either going to assume they're all in agreement, but no. So I do believe that from a CIO or CTO perspective, they of course are focused on this from exactly that. So from the infrastructure, the technological infrastructure perspective. But what you'll see on the next slide, the key indicators that I'm going to outline show a clear integration of all of those things being very critical to assessing organizational readiness. So it is going to require partnership, right? It is going to require a deeper understanding at every level, and not just at the people level, but also at the infrastructure level as well.
I want to add something to what you were just saying, like the CHR CTO, and I think that the key answer is who understands the process that the people are doing that influences the results of the organization. Too often you have CTOs that are focused on the infrastructure and not on how the organization uses it. They're focused on the cost, they're focused on the upkeep of it, et cetera. And I think that the mindset of a CHRO typically has a bit more of an understanding of the process and the people that interact with the tools, which is why it defaults that way, I think, or is recommended that way. But the real question is who is going to have a cross-functional mindset to understand the process of how everything is working together, I think is the real answer for the organization.
It's an interesting dilemma because I do see, I do agree in many ways that CHRO should take the lead on this, but we are also, the advocate for psychological safety. And of course, there's a lot of people in the workforce that fear this is going to replace positions and replace people doing the work. So it's just an interesting dilemma that we'd be championing this at the same time creating psychological safety is somewhat a new challenge.
Yeah, I think just to add on to that a little bit, I think the other way to look at it is to think about from a employee development standpoint, using this as an opportunity to upskill the workforce and to try to get ahead and get ready so that when AI is there, then they'll be ready to participate in that.
Absolutely.
So, I've seen a lot of colleagues just get really excited. I'm sure you've seen, right? The most popular LinkedIn courses are those that involve anything having to do with learning about AI.
Yeah.
So, I think it's kind of that either you participate and get ready for it or you fear it. So I think it can actually help colleagues to be ready and really feel safer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Plus it's fun. Good learning for us as well.
Sue, I think
Sarah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, there's one question and one comment. Let me give you the comment in chat. From Robert, chief transformation officers sometimes take the lead. I'm sure you've seen that, right?
Of course. Yep.
And then Rick again asked, can you add color to what is a use case? And Rick, I'm not sure what you mean by a use case of what, which of a use case of what? Can you come off mute and just ask?
Yeah, I use AI Copilot specifically almost every day, but my experimentation is just that. It's not really systematic. It's as I have questions, and I have the impression that I could be building some use cases that would allow me to have AI routines to do my work that I don't currently have. but I'm not really sure how to develop those routines. Let me give you a more specific example. I've done some correlation analysis between variables and then wanted to print out graphics. And I find that I can do the correlation analysis very readily, but at least at this juncture, I haven't found a convenient way to include graphics display using AI. And I'll bet that there is a use case or a system that could be built that would enable me to do that, but I don't know how to do it. So when you say use case, it interests me, but I don't really know what you mean by use case or how that use case is built out.
Yeah, and Rick, it's a phenomenal question. And so my recommendation is that one person is not going to know all of the use cases. And so this is why it's so critical in getting key stakeholder alignment across your organization. And so if everyone is educated, that's kind of this, and I'll go into, I have a ladder, right? And so if your organization has a foundational awareness of what these technologies are and what they're capable of, they can then begin thinking, okay, if I have access to this technology, it could probably do XYZ for my function or make XYZ function more productive just because the tech is doing it. I will say in my wildest dreams, it does all the pivot chart creation for me, but some of those capabilities are still in development. I will say though, if you were to upload and so I'm going to give the caveat because of a risk perspective. So depending on the instance that you have, so if you're using Microsoft Copilot in a closed instance to where you have the agreed upon alignment with Microsoft that your intellectual property is not feeding their larger model, I can make this recommendation that you can simply upload your Excel file and encourage it to do an analysis, and it can pull out information that you might not have ever thought to draw correlation or causation or analysis on. And if you don't have that agreement, I highly recommend removing all intellectual property and just giving it the numbers or maybe some baseline understanding. But yes, like the use cases are vast and there are many. And whether you have the bandwidth to set up a true stakeholder or steering committee for all of these functions to determine use cases and prioritize them, or turning to consulting firms, technology providers that can do some of this for you, there are many options.
Thank you.
Of course.
Kasara, one more question coming in from Dipakanda. I always have a hard time with your name. I'm seeing very few companies with a truly integrated AI strategy across functions addressing key enablers like data strategy, cloud strategy, governance of pilots, talent upskilling and scaling use cases. Any thoughts on how a company should use, just a second, approach the AI journey? Do you see value in the creation of a chief AI officer roles in a company?
Well, it's a wonderful assessment, and yes, exactly what you were saying, and that's why I said many of the organizations that I speak to right now fall in the first bucket. They are kind of getting analysis paralysis in a way where they feel it's vast. There's a lot to consider. Do we have the bandwidth, the infrastructure? And so I have a framework that I am going to show. I also have some key readiness indicators that I'm going to move into, which I think will answer some of those questions. So let me move into some of that. And then if there's still parts of that question that go unanswered, we can tap into it at the end. Does that work? Awesome. Okay. So this next part, these key readiness indicators, this is something that in my experience, this is the baseline, and this is where organizations should start. So before identifying use cases, before rolling out strategies and aligning on vendors, these are the key things that you need to be thinking about to even determine if your organization is ready to adopt the technology at hand and begin in parallel working on and evaluating these indicators while moving yourself up the organizational adoption framework that I'm going to show. So the very first thing As I was, as I completed my MBA in predictive and prescriptive analytics, I became so deeply excited. This was my very favorite topic, and that's data literacy. And it's because, in my program, I was working with other professionals mostly that weren't sitting in data functions. And so now the course that I teach at Moravian is on exactly this topic. And it's because most individuals do not consider themselves data literate. And so it's critical and imperative for your organization to understand that of course, your data teams are data literate, but is your front line data literate? And one of my favorite stories to tell here, and I'm going to tell it in a very succinct manner, but if we think about a retailer, and so let's say the very front line, the person that's working the counter at a brick and mortar location, they are not data literate in many instances. And so an example of that could be every single time that this person is checking folks out, they think that their job is to get them signed up for the rewards program. They think that that is their only job. And so their job is to move people through the store quickly and to sign them up for the rewards program. And as every user comes up, or as every customer comes up, they sell them the products, they're ringing them up and they say, hey, join our rewards program. I want to give you 5% off today. And so from a high perspective, from an organizational perspective, they're thinking it's also her job to get their phone number and their address, because then we can do some deep data analysis on income for that location and mailing out, advertisements during the holiday season. But for this person, they don't think that it's their job to get the right address. They just want to move them through the store and get them signed up. So for every single user, that retail professional is just throwing in their own address because they know it. They don't have to know the street names. They don't have to know the right address. And so they've completely destroyed the quality of the data for that entire model for the organization because they don't have an understanding of their role in the data quality and data governance of that retail organization. And so I'm sure in your industries, you can think of many other ways in which that exact story resonates, where the front line is not data literate, the leaders don't understand or prioritize data literacy or data-driven decision-making. And so doing these assessments, gauging your employees' comfort level with using data, giving them data-related tasks can really help you to identify whether or not your organization is ready. The next piece, and so as I said, all of these indicators are going to show either, an alignment to people or an alignment to tech, and how imperative it is that someone is leading the charge and bringing all of these folks together. But your infrastructure needs to be there. Do you have a solid IT infrastructure? Do you know where your data is being stored? Is it in a lake? Do you have a taxonomy set up? Is that data structured or is it unstructured? How much of your data are you actually able to use, or is it actually being housed and used by third parties? Is the technology that you're using white labeled and so you can't use some of that data? Are you aware of all of those intricacies? And so if not, you need to conduct a gap analysis. You need to identify if there's any deficiencies in the system as you begin understanding where generative AI and these emerging technologies are going to fit. Of course, I could not come to this platform and not bring up cultural adaptability. And so, whether it's your organization's, ability to adapt to change and innovation and to adopt new tools or new tech, this is a big component. And so it's not just your organizational culture, but it's also the culture of the individuals within your organization. So if you have a location in Silicon Valley, of course, those folks are going to be a lot more likely to adapt to this change than, say, maybe an employee that sits in Japan, where hierarchy and harmony are the central, foundations of their culture. So knowing, again, who your employees are, knowing, their cultural propensity to change, and then knowing the team and organizational culture within that they sit is going to be imperative to understanding when and if they're going to be ready to embrace this next revolution. And a part of that is leadership support. And so in my current work, I'm responsible for designing technology for 8,500 international associates. right? And so some of these teams have a future focus. They're excited. They could not be more thrilled at the idea of using new technology to help them be more productive. And on the other hand, I got off of a call just 2 weeks ago where senior leadership was saying, I'm afraid this technology is going to make them lazy, right? So do you have the support of your leaders in rolling out these key emerging technologies? Do you know what they're thinking? Do you have your finger on the pulse? And so when Rick asked, how do I identify these use cases? This is a key way to understand. And so another thing that I need to bring up is that I recently ran an event for senior leaders, specifically in HR. And so those that attended the event with C-suite titles were 75% more likely to indicate that their organization is a 6 out of 10 or higher in readiness for AI. Anyone that did not have that C-suite designation was 25%, was 25% more likely to not have any idea where the organization stood from an AI readiness perspective. And so what this tells me too is that the C-suite is very well aware of what is happening in this market, but that is not being disseminated into the rest of the organization. And so while senior leadership may support these initiatives, are all other leaders aware and data literate and in support of these emerging technologies? And are they, in tandem, driving employee engagement in a way that is driving excitement as opposed to fear? And so, again, setting up a vast stakeholder group that is inclusive not just of, again, senior leadership and consultants and operations professionals, but of these leaders and of your employees. Allow them to submit use cases. Allow them to educate themselves. Give them the opportunity to train and upskill on these emerging technologies so that they can draw the correlations that you may not be able to see from the C-suite. And so I'm going to pause, and I would love to hear if there are any organizations that have already assessed your readiness for adopting these new and emerging technologies, maybe specifically AI or generative AI. And if not, maybe any indication if your organizations have focused at all on data literacy. Data-driven decision-making has been around for a little bit longer. And so is this something that you've either assessed or evaluated as well?
Quiet group. Hey, I've got a question, Kasara, before you leave that slide. So when you started talking about Japan, my mind went to, okay, global companies need to really consider the different kinds of aspects depending upon the culture of the country, right? And I thought of that because of my my role in a previous life. So have you had any? Are you working with any global companies, and how are they handling that?
Yes, and that's exactly why I brought it up, because it's not just, I think, when, again, as an anthropologist, I have to see both sides. So it's organizational culture is one thing, but what isn't often considered is, again, the culture of the employees or the teams. And their propensity for change is going to vary based on where they sit in the world. And I was speaking to an organization that was headquartered in Australia, and I simply asked one of the VPs that I was speaking to, I said, hey, if you had to make an assessment, whether it's specifically for your organization or, Australian culture as a whole, when you see something happening in the United States, how long do you traditionally see those impact and that influence coming to Australia and then truly having a widespread impact? And she said, honestly, on average, no less than 3 years. And so that is, I think, significant in some of this analysis. And so, and honestly, Australia is far ahead of the curve, where if you speak to certain Asian countries, it's 10 years or sometimes never because of laws and regulations and their limited ability to adopt some of these emerging technologies. And so we don't need to get into the compliance and regulatory framework of all of this as well, even though that's a whole other topic. But yes, global organizations absolutely need to take team culture from a location perspective into consideration as well.
Yes, sir. I work with a company in San Francisco that's using AI and machine learning and natural language processing in the human resource area. So I think this is a use case to assess morale or engagement and facets of culture. So that's one way that I'm moving into this area. But as it relates to my own business, I'm not quite as advanced in terms of figuring out how to develop the use cases. So I find what you're talking about very interesting.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rick. And yes, it is something I think at the very least, as I'm asking these questions and we're hearing silence on the call, if anything, that should be validating in the sense that many organizations feel like they're just staring down this foggy road, which I do actually have imagery for in a little bit and a story about, but it is very much so. Everyone kind of feels like they need to do something. They're not quite sure what, and they just want some alignment and some assistance. And so I'm happy to have further conversations. I know that this can go much deeper, but there are very many resources at your disposal, including, I guess, technically you could just ask generative AI to give you some use cases if it knows you well enough.
Kasara, I was being quiet because I actually recently retired as a CHRO. But before I did that, our board of directors was all over what we were doing with AI, what were the possibilities and what were the policies that we needed to put in place. And so we did some fun things with them, doing some graphics, building some advertising that would normally, be much more expensive, and did it like right there on the fly with them, so that they could see some kind of safe and fun use cases, just so they could see why this was of value. And tried to kind of turn it from, all of this is bad to here's how we're kind of on top of it. And so I think there was a lot of excitement in thinking about how it could be used across all of the functions, and how it was coming. And this was really a good thing. So, lots of good excitement and, another realm of cleaning up our data so that we could use it more smoothly. But that seemed like that was always an ongoing, we were always cleaning up data.
Stu, I love that. And yes, exactly what you just said. There isn't a finish line here. You're not going to get to a point where you're like, we did it. Like, that is not the goal. It's setting up processes, being future ready, and having an organization that's, adaptive to change is going to be the key indicator here. But to your exact point, every single organization that I sit down with, we start fear-based, right? They're always fearful. And even in my own organization, when I'm, discussing the technology that's coming, it is still top of mind. Like, is this going to replace my job? Is this going to take more than what I can give as a human being? And still, in my opinion, the answer is very much so no. And I think, if anything, and maybe this is my constant rose-colored glasses, but at every point in human history, human beings with tools replaced human beings without. Right? So the person with the hammer replaced the person with the rock. The person with the wheelbarrow replaced the person with the knapsack. And this is just another tool. And if we can begin imagining it that way, and partnering and collaborating and becoming collectively intelligent with these tools, if that's the skill set we prioritize, human beings are going to find so much more enjoyment in their work. And I think it's a really beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm. Very well said.
I mentioned that I was doing some correlation analysis and I wanted to do some graphics. I've taken a course in R, programming language. I don't consider myself to be well-versed in writing programs, but I asked AI to write the program for me in R, and it did. And I put the data in the program and I was able to get graphics. And so part of what I would say is that intrigued me enough that I'm wanting to build some use cases that integrate all of that, so I'm not having to have that first step of doing the correlation analysis and then doing the R programming. And I think that's an example of how at least I might be able to advance my work by building an integrated use case that I don't have to build every time I want to ask, a question.
Rick, in my opinion, anything you can do to not have to stay inside of R is a win. So good for you. It's a beautiful use case. And getting to the point of, and I'm actually going to advance and begin going through the framework, because exactly what you're saying, there are specialized models out there that are specific to programming.
Yeah.
Right. So going to ChatGPT, it is a very generally, and I won't say generally intelligent, because that gets people thinking of like the Terminator and iRobot. So I won't go there. But I do think that if you can also do some research into these incredibly specialized instances of the technology, you'll also find that there isn't a one size fits all approach. You can't just stand up ChatGPT or Copilot and say, I've done it. And so doing, that vendor analysis and determining, is there a vendor that exists that I can partner with my very specific business needs, that can accomplish most of the functions that I do in a day that suck up a lot of my time, that I don't find joy from. And there's a really good chance that there is already. And so we will go through some of that vendor analysis as well.
Thank you.
Of course. So I want to go through this part quickly, simply because it's just a ladder, right? It's just a framework for moving up the ladder in organizational adoption. And I think from what I'm hearing and from what I'm seeing in the market, and not just on this call, most organizations fall within the first 3 segments of this ladder. So kicking off with foundational awareness, this is really step 1. Attending sessions, reaching out to LinkedIn courses, Google courses, Udemy courses, finding that foundational awareness of what the technology is capable of and how it works. That's step 1. And then I think the other piece, that to, I believe it was Sue's point, but most, or maybe it was Sharon's, but most organizations leave the technology up to the CIO or CTO. But at this point, it is literally mission critical to ensure that you are communicating to employees about this technology, whether it's simply addressing the fact that the technology exists, or being a little bit more transparent about what next steps are for the organization. At my specific organization, I am not able to use generative AI at work yet. I'm able to use it with specific use cases and with permissions. But here's the deal. This technology, if my organization said, sure, Kasara, you can access ChatGPT from your work laptop, that puts a ton of client data at risk. And so my organization very early on said, absolutely not. We need to remain synonymous with security. We need to remain synonymous with trust. And so we are not allowing the interaction with open instances on work platforms. And so outside of addressing use cases and doing a risk analysis, it's also simply saying to employees, hey, here's where we stand. Here are some of the risks, or here's how you can responsibly use AI today, right now, to make your work more enjoyable, and doing some analysis as to what that might look like. And it's an opportunity to get the ball rolling at the very, very least. Okay, so this next step, the initial exploration. Oh, there we go. So launching pilot projects, partnering with vendors, we're going to dive into that. The guided implementation of these technologies, again, the really great news is it is not imperative for all of you to go to OpenAI and to say, okay, we're going to stand up ChatGPT within the organization and all of these different functions for all of these use cases and pillars. Many organizations, and I have a statistic on the next slide, according to McKinsey, 50% of organizations right now are moving ahead with their AI and generative AI strategy using already created models. They are not going fully down the path of setting up a developer team internally to create an LLM specifically for their organization, right? They are partnering with vendors for this guided implementation. And so when I said in the beginning, this needs to be a horizontal approach, this needs to be a thread, it's because there are many vendors across many different segments that can assist and help you with the implementation of these technologies for your organization, excuse me. And again, I've said this so many times, but developing a cross-functional team, developing a cross-functional steering committee to oversee some of these initiatives, to discuss what the possibilities are. There's a good chance, depending on the size of your organization, that your marketing department might already be using Grammarly Go, right? That your marketing department is already diving into the ways in which generative AI can begin helping them with messaging or outreach strategies. And so if there isn't this cross-functional alignment, what you're going to see is a very disjointed approach and siloed approach to this integration, and nobody wins when that is the case.
Can you
And
repeat,
so-
I'm sorry to interrupt, Kasara, you just mentioned your marketing department may already be using, what was it that you referenced?
So Grammarly, which is a very well-known.
Grammarly, yes, thank you.
Yeah, but Grammarly, they very early on, they knew that there was a big implication to their business by using Gen AI, because obviously I could copy paste my information and pay for Grammarly, or I can copy paste into ChatGPT and now it's free, right? So they're one of those specialized vendors that I just mentioned, similar to Rick's R Alliance. They're one of those vendors that they immediately stood up some technology, and a very specialized technology now called Grammarly Go, which focuses on a lot of different inputs. There's also one of my very favorite technologies that I've been researching is called Acrolinx. And so they're also, and that's ACROLINX. That's an organization that you can feed the model with your own branding guidelines, your own inclusive language guidelines, and it actually can be an Outlook add-on, to where if you have associates or employees within your organization sending emails, Acrolinx will come over top and be like, like that is not an accurate reflection of our product, or we don't, that doesn't follow our brand guideline or our inclusive language guideline. And so many of these things are now going to be integrated in with generative AI as well, as associates are using it to create emails and so on and so forth. So there's some really cool tech from a marketing and branding perspective that are widely becoming available. Any other questions on those first two pillars? Again, I'm going to kind of fly through the last pieces because I know many orgs aren't there yet, but any questions on these first two?
No.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So next, we talked about those buckets, right? We talked about the risk and your organization's propensity to take risk. And so once you understand what the technology is and do some initial exploration into what is widely available, you can then be really intentional about structured implementation. So develop that strategy, align it with those business goals, invest in the necessary infrastructure after you do the gap analysis, and ensure that you have all the right tools and infrastructure in place. Establishing, of course, in my opinion, governance and ethical guidelines for this use is also incredibly critical. And so when we dive into the vendor analysis and determining the criteria for who you should be partnering with, this is another element there of making sure that ethically they match what your organization believes in and values.
Because Sarah, it seems to me that when you're working with a vendor and they're developing something for you, that what they've done is a little bit like a black box. How do you audit the work of vendors to make sure that what you've purchased is actually giving you accurate results?
Yeah, so many of these organizations do have the modeling and the algorithms already in place to determine the efficiency of the work that they are doing. So they should be very transparent, and it's something that I recommend very early on as you're assessing these vendors to ask about. How do you And so if you would like to have your own in place to be able to assess and evaluate the outputs, you can do that within, your organization. But again, many of these vendors and providers are being asked to be transparent about the validity of their modeling and their outputs. And so you should be able to ask and receive the information in the assessment process and not just wait until you've already implemented them.
Thank you.
Of course. Awesome. So again, as my promise, we're going to fly through these last few because eventually every single one of you, I know it, you'll be here, you'll be industry leaders. But in the meantime, as we build up in this ladder, the thing I want to talk about the most under the advanced capabilities, and it's something that as C-suite leaders, it's something I'm incredibly passionate about, but it's reimagining your workforce. And so there haven't been many times in history where organizations could pause and take a moment and say, how is this technology going to influence the human activities within every role in my organization? Because the truth is, as we know, it can. And what's difficult here, and I want to go back to, one of the very first slides that I showed on basically the hype cycle of AI. We have peaks, we have valleys, we have peaks, we have valleys. Right now we're in a peak. And in order to not approach another valley where everyone feels like their investment dollars went to waste, whatever the case is, we need to be very intentional about the rollout of these technologies and the influence and implementation of them. So there's a big difference between, and as I said before, human beings with tools versus allowing a tool to be the human being. And that is not at all what I am recommending. However, there are many different activities within an employee's day that can be augmented by traditional AI and now generative AI, or most likely a combination of the two. And so in this process, we have the opportunity right now to determine the augmentation and automation capabilities of this technology with the humans doing the work, and bring, again, those human skills to the top. Let the cream rise to the top. Let the technology augment and automate what it can. Reimagine your workforce. To Sue's point, training and developing, upskilling and reskilling. Historically, I attended a session at Work Human Live in April where a Harvard professor released the results of a reskilling initiative. And she was talking about all of the different ways in which organizations reskill and take low-skilled employees and give them new skills. And I asked her at the end, I said, did they do an initial evaluation in any of these instances of, who should be reskilled and what they should be reskilled in and why? And she said, no, they didn't. They just simply looked at low-skill workers and they thought, we should upskill them or we should reskill them. And so this is a true opportunity to become organizational architects, to completely reimagine. There are organizations like Hire, H-A-I-E-R, that went from a true hierarchy within their organization. So senior leaders, mid-level managers, frontline associates, to a flat structure. There are just two levels between the C-suite and the rest of the employees. And this is an opportunity to do exactly that. Let's reimagine what our workforce looks like and the work that they are doing so that you are here and so that you are leaders in the future. And I think, Cindy, honestly, oh, go ahead.
What was the name of that again? Hire?
Yeah, H-A-I-E-R. And they have 4,000. At the time where I did the research on them, they had 4,000 micro business units that they were operating with. And once a project was over, they redistributed that micro business unit to others and then, reused those skills in other capacities. And just a beautiful way to get work done and incredibly engaged employees and leaders in the process.
Cool.
So Kasara, we're running out of time.
Oh.
I have already, when Noelle left, and by the way, she's been a COO and she's been in charge of operations for companies like GE. She said this was an amazing discussion. And I said, well, I think we need a part two. And I do. I mean, I agree with her. This is an amazing discussion. So I would like to talk to you about how do we do a part 2, and I would ask everybody on this call, when I send out the follow-up email with the recording and the slides, please let us know what additional things you would like for her to cover in part 2. I know she's got a part 2 already because she's not gone through all of her slides yet, but I do think that you are a valuable resource, Kasara. I mean, I'm excited about hearing more. Anybody want to comment on anything they want to hear in a part 2 before I want you to share your Tesla case study, okay? Before we sign off, okay? Anybody have anything they want to share, they want to ask her to cover in part 2?
I think for me, just a broader exposure to vendors out there that we might be able to access.
And she probably has that for sure.
I sure do.
Yeah, for me, it would be, really good examples of moving from pilot use cases to leveraging the technology at scale, which is what most companies are getting challenged with. I think everybody's got shiny objects, pilots, but true adoption and creating value at scale is probably very few examples right now.
Yeah, and that's exactly, in my opinion, it's because they implemented the shiny object before doing any readiness indication. And so maybe they just found a team that historically had high tool adoption and they were like, great, we're just going to use that team. So yeah, I would absolutely love to dive into that further.
Okay, we've got 2 minutes. Can you go through the Tesla example for them?
I can. All right, really quick. And so this is something, it's a story that I developed in tandem. I'm a big fan of collaborative storytelling because my perspective is just one, and there are so many brilliant people within my organization. And so I sat down with one of our senior data scientists and I was like, hey, I need to understand, I know, and this is something that, again, I think is the crux of any AI message, and it's that not all AI is created equal. Right. And if there's anything that you walk away from this talk today with, and even heading into part 2, not all artificial intelligence is created equal. And so, as Cindy mentioned with Matthew McConaughey walking around about data being gold, it's true, but it's not just any data. I mean, there was so much bias early on in these early models that were apparent because of the garbage data that fed some of the modeling. And so, working for the organization I work for, I have a really high standard for data quality. I have a very high standard for data governance and an even higher standard for responsible AI development. And so my institute that I attend is called the California Institute of Integral Studies. It's in downtown San Francisco. And I had the very unique opportunity in October to take my 2 sons into downtown San Francisco during my intensive for my PhD program. And as we're driving around, they're 8 and 5, so they're young. The constant squeals that I heard about all of the autonomously driving vehicles that exist in downtown San Francisco, it was nonstop. And so what I witnessed is many different providers that I had never heard of driving around downtown San Francisco, all of them trained on the same thing, right? They're trained on the city, they're trained on traffic, they're trained on stoplights, pedestrians, stop signs, maybe dogs and cats, right? They're trained on all of those things. And so I'm super comfortable getting into a Waymo or a Rivian or any of these, autonomously driving vehicles in San Francisco. I'm comfortable because I know that their algorithms are probably adequately trained on that environment. But if you asked me if I would be comfortable in a Waymo in the Swiss Alps, I would say no, right? And it's because there's an organization like Tesla that exists. And now Tesla has the largest fleet of autonomously driving vehicles in the world. They've seen nearly everything that the world has thrown at them. And so if you're not, I mean, obviously you're all incredibly smart. We're drawing correlations here to vendor selection. So if I'm going to select the vendor that is dropping me in the Swiss Alps, it's going to be Tesla. And it's because Tesla has the largest and highest quality data set of any of these providers in the world. And so while I'm comfortable getting into any vendor or autonomously driving vehicle vendor, in the downtown of San Francisco, what I'm not comfortable with is getting into one of those vendors that hasn't navigated a terrain that isn't often seen, right? I know that Tesla is my best bet. They have the largest data set. They have a commitment to data quality. And so if I am approaching a goat in the road, who I select as a vendor is going to determine whether I am driven into this obstacle or safely navigated around it. And so from a vendor selection perspective, this is the type of mindset you need to have. Does this vendor have a commitment to data quality, R&D budgets and guidelines for not just knowing what is existing in the most common instances, but in my weird use cases that I have, if Rick is saying, hey, I need someone to write R programming for me at a really exceptional scale, he needs to be very selective about which vendor is going to give him terrible programming and drive him directly into this poor little goat, and which vendor is going to safely navigate him around it, right? And so I know we're at time. In our next session, I have an entire segment on vendor selection criteria, and I can give you a really quick peek at what that criteria looks like. If you want to grab a screenshot, there's not going to be much at scale here that we can talk about, but these are the things that we need to consider. Which vendor is navigating us safely around our organization's obstacles? Who is the best vendor for each of those tasks? And so I guess we'll dive into that in part 2.